For 19 days in the month of March, the city of Austin, Texas was on high alert because of a series of bombings that killed 2 people and injured several others. The suspected bomber, Mark Anthony Condit, killed himself during a standoff with police, hopefully indicating that this wave of violence has ended. Although police are remaining vigilant and encouraging Austin residents to do the same in case there are more package bombs to be found. Now, most press on this situation that I've seen has not referred to Condit as a domestic terrorist, and the police seem to be hesitant to do so as well. And many folks on social media are a little perturbed by that. A common criticism of news media is how white suspects in these kinds of crimes are rarely referred to as terrorists, while non-white suspects often are. Beyond that, with white guys, the media often handles them with kid gloves and sometimes even wants you to sympathize with the killer. He was a troubled soul, a victim of depression.
He killed 2 innocent people.
A misunderstood loner.
He literally referred to himself as a psychopath.
No one could have guessed what he was capable of.
Are you sure about that?
No one could have guessed. And they use a nice picture of the suspect all happy and smiling. With non-white suspects, it's usually a different story. Sometimes you don't even get a backstory. It's just like, see brown man bad. But is Mark Anthony Condit in fact a terrorist? What even is a terrorist? It's not useful, in my opinion, to define terrorism as any attempt to harm or kill a lot of people, because there are often very different motives and strategies behind these attacks, and it's important to acknowledge those differences so that we can understand these unique situations and how to deal with them.
Hi, I'm T1J.
Follow me.
So this is borderline a semantic debate, and if you know anything about me, you'll know that that is my least favorite kind of debate. Because if 2 people are using the same word but have different ideas about what that word means, then that discussion is never going to get anywhere. So we need to decide what the word terrorist means and what separates terrorism from other kinds of mass violence. In spite of how simple that sounds, that's no easy task. There is no commonly accepted definition of terrorism, and that's definitely not going to be settled in this video. It's kind of a bad term, to be honest. It's too broad and too emotionally charged. It has an inherently immoral connotation, unlike a term like mass killer, which is still obviously negative, but much more descriptive than judgmental. Because of the charged nature of the word, people use the word terrorist to denounce any group they oppose. Everything from the NRA to vegans. So for this video, we'll discuss what I think of when I hear the word terrorist, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree. Because in America, opinions are like guns. Everyone's entitled to have them, although most people probably shouldn't.
The United States Department of Defense describes terrorism as follows: the unlawful use of violence or threat of violence to instill fear and coerce governments or societies. Terrorism is often motivated by religious, political, or other ideological beliefs and committed in the pursuit of goals that are usually political. And I feel like that's a good definition to start with. But we can look at the characteristics of different terror attacks throughout history to expand that definition. As implied by the name, terrorism is usually designed to cause terror and fear in the eyes of the masses. Terrorists seem to target individuals or groups that they perceive to be guilty of something, whether it be actions of a government or simply an individual or society living a lifestyle they don't approve of. Terrorism is usually premeditated and involves an organized and detailed plan of attack. Because of this, terrorists tend to work in secret and avoid detection. They also usually attempt to avoid being captured or subdued because they usually have political goals that they are still working towards. Now, of course, there are also suicide attacks that have become strongly associated with terrorism, but I'd argue that these are used because they are particularly terrifying. So it sort of still fits the goal of causing terror and fear. Now, contrast these characteristics with those of other kinds of mass violence. Of course, I can't read people's minds, but I suspect that some kinds of mass killers are out to make a point or to lash out, and are usually driven by personal or psychological motives rather than political ones. They often attack random, innocent people rather than specific targets they think are guilty. They generally make no attempt to avoid detection. They do it in public in front of everybody. And they often commit suicide as soon as or before they are cornered or captured, implying that the attack was meant as a one-off event rather than an ongoing plan. So with these definitions in mind, we can categorize different people as terrorists or non-terrorists. Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, was definitely a terrorist. He had a political goal and he intended to punish people he felt were guilty of something. Dylan Roof, who killed 9 people at a church in Charleston, South Carolina, also a terrorist. A clear political motive designed to strike fear in a community and targeting people described as enemies to himself. Also note that both of these people attempted to evade capture and neither committed suicide. On the other hand, you have people like Adam Lanza, the perpetrator of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. While his motive is still unclear, most of his victims were young children, making it unlikely he thought they were specifically guilty of anything. Also, Lanza committed suicide before he was even found by police. James Holmes, who killed 12 and injured many others at a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, sent a notebook to his psychiatrist hours before the shooting began. One of the things he wrote was, "Terrorism isn't the message. The message is there is no message." And while Holmes didn't commit suicide, he also made no attempt to evade capture. He was arrested right outside of the movie theater without any resistance.
A special type of mass killer is a serial killer who usually kills one person at a time over a long period. As far as I can tell, these people are usually sociopaths who just get off on violence and murder. And they usually go to great lengths to avoid being captured. Think of people like Ted Bundy or the Zodiac Killer. And of course, it's not always simple and clean. Sometimes there's overlap. For example, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, was a serial killer, but also undeniably a terrorist.
So given all of that, how should we describe Mark Anthony Condit? It has been speculated that the bombings were racially motivated because 3 of the people targeted were non-white, which I think would make this a pretty clear-cut terrorist situation. However, unlike most terrorists, Condit never made it clear to the public what his motive was. It seems to me that this was a violent lashing out because of his own personal problems. And in fact, a person claiming to be the Austin bomber posted several comments on Reddit the day before he was cornered by police. In these posts, he denies a racial motivation and says, "I honestly just want to see the world burn." And according to the Austin police, the recording was found on Condit's phone where he confesses to the bombings but doesn't mention any political or racial motivations, which just doesn't fit the profile of a domestic terrorist.
So here's my thing. At the end of the day, Mark Anthony Condit was a murderer, a deranged, cowardly human being who killed innocent people. And the way the news media often tries to paint people like this in a sympathetic light is not only offensive to me, but also deeply disrespectful to the victims and their families. It's also very clear that this delicate treatment is disproportionately afforded to white criminals and white suspects. People have actually done studies on this, but I'm sure you've noticed it yourself if you're paying attention. So I don't back the narrative of this poor, misunderstood character who just needed a little more attention. He was a killer. He was a bad person who deserves no sympathy. At the same time, I think it's important to understand the different motivations people can have for committing terrible crimes like this. Dealing with domestic terrorists with political motives is a completely different ballpark than dealing with violent individuals who want to hurt others because they could never get a date. So I do think it's important who we call a terrorist. And I'm not sure that the Austin bomber actually fits that profile. That's just me though. What do you think?
Thank you for watching my video. Now I'm gonna be real with you. Ad revenue is basically not a thing anymore on this channel. Being a full-time video creator is harder than it's ever been. So if you find any value in these videos and you'd like to help me make them better and more sustainable, click or tap the Patreon logo below and become a patron. Even a pledge of $1 a month goes a super long way. So it would be amazing if you checked out my Patreon page. And I wanna take this time to thank all of my existing patrons. You are the lifeblood of this channel, literally.